let in attendees here, and then we'll get started pretty quick here. Hey, Deb, how's it going?
Good. I'm fine. How are you?
Very good. Very good.
Hey.
We're
Hey,
excited to get started.
Hey,
Nice to meet you, Deb.
nice to meet you, Jay.
All right. I'm going to turn off I don't know if you guys can hear it, turn off the participant joining sound. And if y'all want to mute yourselves while I give the intro, we'll get started. And if you guys see somebody enter the waiting room, I've made you co-hosts, at least Vinay and anybody else, and Rob and Henry. So you can let them in if somebody enters the waiting room. Okay, great. So we're about to get started. Just a little overview of what we're doing here. This is a business podcast mastermind. We started with a few talented friends in the business and podcasting space, who I'll introduce in a moment. Now we've expanded to include smart guests, attendees, and regular members. I'll introduce today's guests in a minute, but first, a quick introduction to your co-hosts. I'll let them wave as I call them out. First, I'll introduce Rob, who's getting settled there. He's the VP of Content and Partnerships at Libsyn, chair of the Podcast Academy, co-host of the New Media Show, and longtime evangelist of the podcasting industry. Next, I'll introduce Henry Lopez, a serial entrepreneur, small business coach, and host of top-rated The How of Business podcast, dedicated to helping others start, run, and grow their small businesses. I was checking out your chart ratings, Henry. You look like you're doing pretty well there on Chartable the other day. Vinay Koshi, give a wave. He's the host of the Predictable B2B podcast, founder of Sproutworth. He helps others achieve predictable business growth and influence through content marketing. And finally, I'm Ethan Janney. I'm a business and executive coach and co-host of the Run With It podcast. We invite 7+ figure entrepreneurs to share business ideas and action steps to launch them. And now Jay, our guest, you can give a little wave and I'll tell people about you. You're the host of the Creative Elements podcast. At just 29 or so episodes in, last you told me, you've broken 250,000 downloads all time. You carefully and strategically planned a successful launch, which included partnering with a podcast network. And you're joining us to share your story with our audience so that they can master their strategy like you did. Not to oversell you.
Please undersell me.
But, it's a pleasure to have you here. I think while I was researching you, what I was impressed with was the ability that you had to execute on researching and planning behind the scenes before getting the podcast started. I know my personality is more, if I plan too much, I get lost in the weeds and things don't get done. So I tend to just get out there and do stuff. And so it's reassuring to me to see someone have success with putting some effort into the planning process and really making a lot of that. So I'm very interested to hear more about how planning plays a role in your success. I'll jump right in here and ask you to compare, because I know you have the two podcasts, the podcast that you had before you started Creative Elements, and then the podcast that you have started, Creative Elements. How did your experience from the previous podcast inform how you went about starting Creative Elements?
Totally. Well, thank you, Ethan, and everybody here for having me. Really excited about this. So the first podcast that you're talking about is called Upside, and we launched that in May of 2018. And it was really an effort for Eric, my co-host, and I to learn what it was like to be an angel investor. We thought we might actually want to start a fund. And then we realized that's going to take a lot of time and a lot of work. And maybe that's not what we want to prioritize right now. But we wanted to get some practice talking to founders as if we might invest. And that became the format of our show. And we're proud of that because it's a unique format. It's not a typical interview show. It's a 3-part show where at the end we talk about this as an investment opportunity. And we still run that to this day. Last week, we released our 162nd episode, I think it was. I love doing that show. It's a lot of fun. I love audio as a medium. It started to drift away from the core of what I do as a business owner, which is to work with more creatives and creators. And I felt this tension of, I love doing audio, but I just wish it was serving the core audience that my business serves, so it felt more aligned. And that's kind of the question that I wrestled with for a few months, because I wanted to figure out a show in that direction, but I also wanted it to be worthwhile for all the time and resources that I was going to invest into it. Because Upside, it's a pretty niche show. Like, we're talking to startup founders who are pre-Series A, we're talking to investors, we're talking to community builders, people that are interested in startups, startup investing, and even more specifically, startup investing not based in San Francisco. It's just a pretty small audience all told. And I wanted to go a little bit broader. I wanted something that was more mainstream and had more advertising and sponsorship potential. Because what I realized was the amount of time that I want to put into something, I'm going to put in the same amount of time for a show that has a large listener base or not. So I wanted to put the effort towards something that felt more commercially viable. And so I started the process of thinking about, who was my audience?
I just want to interrupt here just to give a little bit of context to people listening. So your business, which is around freelancing school and that kind of process, that's what you're talking about in terms of wanting to align with the clients that were the people that you served outside of your existing podcast, right?
Yeah, my core businesses are facilitating mastermind groups. Essentially, it's an online accelerator. And most of my clients in that realm are creative service providers. And then the other part of that is a course business, which helps freelancers predominantly. So similar customer type, but two different offerings, not in the startup investing realm.
Right. Got it. And so it sounds like the thought process that went into what is Creative Elements going to be, it was really, you already had an avatar for your listener, but you needed to find out, what does that listener need if they're going to listen to a podcast, right?
Yeah, I have an avatar. What does that listener need? What's interesting to me? And what is something that I have access to that I think would be difficult to replicate? And so the ingredients that I kind of pulled in were, I also wanted to learn, and I wanted to build relationships with people that were difficult to access typically. But I had a couple people who I thought they're well-known people. Like, my first two episodes were Seth Godin and James Clear. And both those guys have had really great success. And based on previous interactions I'd had with them, I thought I might be able to get them to sign on to do an interview early in the show's existence. And the thesis was, if I get those two, I think that will give me a springboard to get listeners and also parlay that into other guests that are difficult to access to. And that's something I've been thinking for a while. Is I've been fortunate to build some really great relationships over the years with really successful, awesome creators. And I had no way of collaborating with them really. And I wanted to, but I had no way to do it. And so I started to put together this format of Creative Elements to talk to those people, to speak to my avatar, and to help the avatar of the business that I've already built.
Oh, can I ask a clarifying question again?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, but so this is interesting around building these relationships, and you had built these relationships. And I think it's useful to hear what kind of extent was the relationship? Was it something where you needed to interact with these people on a weekly, monthly, whatever basis for a certain amount of time? Was it just you had exchanged a few emails? How well do you feel like you had to get to know them first? What kind of evidence, started to develop between you and them? Would they be like, yeah, I want to go on, I want to go on this guy's podcast? Do you have any thoughts about that and how other people can apply?
It was both. The closest relationship I had was James Clear, who lives in Columbus. I live in Columbus. We'd gotten to know each other the last couple of years. We would meet up a couple times a year, and he was kind of a mentor to me. And so I knew that if I asked him for 45 minutes or 60 minutes on his schedule when he's in town, I could probably go talk to him and record it. Seth, I have purchased so many of his products, and I would generally follow up with him on my experience over email because he answers his emails. And one of the products I purchased from him was his podcasting fellowship, the first cohort he did. And Upside, the other show, went through that. And I had responded to him with a little bit about the show. At one point, he included that show on the sales page for the product. And so when I asked him to come on this show, I followed up on the same email thread. And I said, hey, I'm actually launching a second show now. I think you'd be a great guest. And the key to any of these people who are seemingly difficult to access and get their time, in the beginning, I wasn't on any rush to start publishing the show. I just wanted to get some great interviews in the can. And so I gave them a very generous time window. I basically asked, is there a time in the next few months that we could talk for 45 minutes to an hour, which makes the bar really, really low. Because if you ask someone, do you have time in the next couple of months to talk for 45 minutes? Most people would be like, of course I do. It's more of a question of, do they want to? And the way that, I had built up some credibility with them already, it was an easy yes.
Got it. And it seems like part of that, and I know this also from just other interviews, was you did this very intentionally in terms of planning the launch of the podcast to say, I want some bigger guests to get started. And so I'm going to leave that leeway. I launch it in a year or 9 months from now, and would give these people that I'm asking, 3 months, 4 months, whatever, to actually put something in their calendar, right?
Yeah. I had recorded close to, I think, maybe 8 interviews I had actually recorded before I started releasing the first finished episodes. And I didn't release them in order of when I recorded them either. I went out intentionally, like I wanted Seth's episode to be the first episode, because if someone hears about my show and they go and visit the show page from now until the end of time, they're going to maybe listen to the trailer, but they might go all the way back to episode 1. And that gives a really strong signal that this person's taking this show seriously.
You also, as I listened to the show, so it's a little bit different than some of the other podcasts that I think that we've had on here in this particular group, and even some of the podcasters that are part of it. Look at like Indie Hackers, who we had on a couple of weeks ago. It's not a heavily produced podcast. It's he does the interviews and he cuts them together. And what I was intrigued about your show was, I wouldn't say, and I hope this is what you're going for. You're not going for like heavy production, like like a podcast like Startup, where they've got a team of people and they've got a huge production process. You're sort of halfway in between this kind of, I did an interview and I'm just going to post it, versus I did an interview, I'm going to comment on it, I'm going to create something, I'm going to put something together, and it's going to be a little bit more polished than just hit record and then post it. Can you speak to how much of that time that you put in before launching needed to go to kind of how you're going to polish it, things like that? And did you have to bring people on a team or something? Curious about that.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. I'm glad you noticed that, because I did want it to stand out from a production quality standpoint, but I am an independent podcaster who's releasing episodes on a weekly basis. So I can't quite do, what an NPR or what a Gimlet can do. But I wanted to every part of the show, I wanted to be remarkable, maybe not like the best, but I wanted it to be something worth commenting on. And I give all credit in the world actually to Jeff Umbro at the Podglomerate, the network that I joined, because he signed on to the idea early based on, this is an audience that I want to serve in a different way than they're being served. And I think I can get some big name guests on the show. And it was a business show. He was interested in doing more business shows. So he's like, all right, I'm in, let's work through this. And as I started to share with him some of my early interviews, I basically cut it together like a typical interview show, where I turn on the mic and I riffed for 5 minutes as an intro, just kind of trying to be fun and unscripted. Just, here I am, here's what I'm thinking, here's what's going on. By the way, now we have an interview. And he pushed back on me. He was like, this is fine. Like, you have a show here, but it's not that much different than every other interview show on the planet, and there's a ton. And so he said, you should see what you can do a little bit differently. And so I started thinking more about narrative arc. Like, now when I edit shows, I end up cutting out 5 to 10 minutes per episode of just stuff that, like, it was okay, but it didn't really seem like it was that useful. And now in the show, I want every second, really, every minute to be worth having in there, or I cut it out.
And just to call back what you said before, you only record like 45 minutes, right? You actually don't record like an hour or longer episodes typically.
I hold an hour, and I try to talk to the person for 5 or so minutes ahead of time. I want to get at least 45 minutes of recorded time, but I'm not going to hold them longer than the hour that they're there. So it kind of depends on how quickly we get into it, how quickly they get comfortable. if there's something that I want to talk to them about off air, like sometimes I'll cut an interview 5 or 10 minutes short because I want a little bit of off air time after we record to talk to that person. But yeah, it's typically like 50 to 55 minutes of recorded audio that I start with. And I'll cut out some of that. I rearrange bits so it has a real narrative arc. I try to thematically tie an episode around this element that the person brings to the show. It's called Creative Elements, and they'll talk about an element of their style or approach that's been important through their creative career, things like brand or authenticity or honesty. So I'm trying to tie that element through narratively through the episode. And I will sometimes cut out my question as stated in the interview to insert a scripted narration or a voiceover to move the story along and sound well produced. And I'll also script the intro to the show, the outro of the show, a little bit of voiceover before the mid-roll ad breaks, that type of thing.
Yeah, I was really impressed with the incredible difference that you could achieve just with, I mean, I think from a listener perspective, I didn't count them out, but it was just really only a handful of, and now I asked Seth about this because I thought this was really important to get into. And then boom, you just went back into the interview. And then on top of that, just the music I thought was really actually gave a lot of professionalism to the podcast. And again, but it didn't seem like it could be way more work than I'm thinking, but it just seemed like you just add some music, add some traditional. So it feels like you're almost in a place, right? I'm in a context. I'm not just listening to an interview. I'm in the creative elements world where this music helps me transition between things. And there's some comments here and there. There's a lot of things we can talk about. I'm probably getting a little distracted, but can you just talk about how complicated is it to put that together? And do you have a team? You do have an editor and engineer, but I don't know what they do.
I have an engineer. So the music that you're talking about, I had that custom made. I had an audio producer who does sound for like video games and stuff like that. He's a friend of mine, and I asked him, one of the first things I did, and this was before I actually pitched it to the network. I wanted to make an attractive package for the network. So part of that was getting really good cover art, getting really good music. And the way that he made the music as an engineer was he made just a single 2-minute track. And the beginning of that track is what became the intro, where it kind of like builds up in crescendos. And after the crescendo, it goes into this loop that became the ad loop. And then it builds back up to an outro, which became the outro. And so with that 2-minute track, we can pull out multiple elements of it that all sound cohesive because it was a single track, and put them underneath ads. We can put them underneath certain areas that we want. And that was really important to me to have that be custom to the show's feel. Now to your question about like how complicated is that to put it together, it's fairly complicated. I have an audio engineer, and it's a multi-step process where I record the interview. I send him the files for the interview. He'll tie that together into a single mixed piece of audio. And then I'll do the editing, where I take now that single piece of audio and I'll go through and I'll cut out the stuff that I don't want. Like he does the ums and ahs and filler words and things like that. That's already gone. But I'll cut out the bits of the conversation that I don't want. I'll reorder things. I'll use that to build the script. What I love about this show is a lot of these creators are professional creators, and they have all kinds of content out there already. So I'll talk to this person and they'll say, yeah, I was on NBC Nightly News talking about my business, and this is in 2013, yada, yada. When I'm doing the final edit, I'll pause there and I'll pull in the YouTube audio from that clip to show that. So it's like, It's narrative, it's storytelling. If that person has their own podcast or their own channel, sometimes I'll pull in elements of that. I just talked to a guy who talked about the year that he spent investing time into Snapchat stories and how cringy it was. Lo and behold, he had actually uploaded a couple of those stories to his YouTube channel. And I went back and I found that. And I found some of his cringy Snapchat audio and I uploaded it to part of the episode. So it really helps the person not have to imagine as much. And it tells a fuller story. They can experience it. I'd say from the point that I finished recording the interview to having the episode fully finished, I probably put in 5 to 6 hours of like pretty intense editing work. And that's now after doing 36 interviews and getting practiced at it. But I'm finding
it sounds so bad. Yes. I mean, I'm not trying to belittle how bad it feels to you. What I'm saying is,
yeah,
yeah,
and
that's not too bad.
That's like,
right.
that's as efficient as I can get it with scripting, with pulling in B-roll audio. I feel good about that, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend like if you want to do the same thing, it's only going to take you 5 to 6 hours. Like that's going to
Exactly.
take you a year of practice to get into that flow, to know how things sound and where to inject more space and where to cut things out. But I'm having a hard
Yeah.
time cutting it down any lower than that right now.
Yeah. I mean, the reason I say that doesn't sound so bad is Chris and I, we have an editor for our podcast now, a producer. We were editing it, individually ourselves. And I would spend about that many hours just editing the audio, just taking out the ands and ums and
Oh, yeah.
those things. So it's also interesting. It's interesting to call back to say, hey, you did have somebody edit out the ands and ums and kind of give you a polished version. I'm going to put a little link in the Zoom chat here. I found this interview on YouTube, which I think is really useful, which is with MakerPad. And you guys go into detail about kind of how you do the editing and how you do the production. It's a really cool interview for somebody that podcasts. So that's in there to check out. I want to skip to some questions here, if you don't mind, in the chat. Is that cool?
Sure. Yeah.
So first one's not really a question, it's a comment, but definitely I think worth commenting on. I have my opinions about this. Deb calling back the way that you tried to book high tier guests from the very start. She said, so this debunks the theory of going from C people to B people to get the A people. You went right to the A level people to help lift the relevance of the podcast. What do you, do you have any comment about? Yeah.
You could go C to B to A. The problem is, like, that's a decision that you should make intentionally before you launch. Because if you launch with, I hate to call people C people, but like C-list celebrities, let's say, if you launch with C people, it's going to be hard then to move to A people right off the bat, because it's a heuristic. People just look at, once the show exists, they're going to look at your past guest list. Well, they're going to look at two things. They're going to look at how many reviews you have on Apple Podcasts to see, like, are people listening to the show? Do I have a reason to believe people are listening to the show? And if you pass that, it doesn't really matter. If you don't pass that, they're going to look at the guest list and see, do people like me do things like this? And if you are interviewing heavy hitting names that this person you're asking recognizes, the point where they feel flattered that you're asking and they feel like this is something they should do, it just gets a lot easier.
And I'll just make a comment on that from my experience in various other realms, including podcasting. And that is, when you try to start from, let's call it like a lower level, or a level where you don't feel like it's where you want to be ultimately, put it that way, what you end up doing is you end up learning about that world. You learn, how do you get those type of guests? How do you produce that type of show? And when you aim for the level that you're hoping for eventually from the very beginning, it gives you opportunity to learn more about what's required of that world more quickly. And sometimes it's not easy to translate the two. So it's like a whole different ballgame to get a guest, that's easy to get, but might be great for a podcast that's very niche, in a typical industry, and they're just happy to come on no matter who contacts them, versus a guest that would be, really exciting to a wider audience, and they've got a super busy schedule and they're going to be very particular about their time. And I will say this too, also, if I think, although this is just, what do you call it, hand waving at the moment, but I think you would have a chance to do over if you wanted to. And I think that it depends on how intentionally you want to do it. You could say, I'm rebranding my podcast. I've seen people who had a podcast for a few years, they took a break for a year and they started again with a whole different brand. They kept their past episodes, but they were able to kind of change the direction of it. So I think you're not completely, I think you can have the possibility to leap into something else if that's the way that you choose to go. Do you think that that's possible, Jay? Like, how would you go about that? Like, if you started a podcast where you weren't aiming for really big names, and then all of a sudden you wanted to see if you could get there. Any thoughts?
That's a really good point. I've seen people do it, and I think I might do a two-step approach where I upload the new brand and the new episodes to the existing feed, but actively try to move them to a new feed that is starting from scratch if that old feed doesn't have really strong marks of ratings and reviews for the number of episodes that are there. It's good because you're starting with an asset of listeners, theoretically, and so you want to move them over. But I think that there is a freshness to a new feed in starting with a big name that feels exciting. And also, like, part of marketing the show, the launch event is a marketable event for different publications and partners, and there's some value in that. And it's hard to create that same sense of launch for a feed that's existed for a couple of years.
Cool. Great tips. Another question here. What is the value investment to be associated with a network? Deb says she's been courting the idea as part of building her reach.
I approached the Podglomerate for two reasons, both really tying back to relationships. I realized, like I said, it's the same work to create a good sounding show that's heard by 0 people as it is to create one that's heard by thousands of people. And so I, with this show, wanted to focus more on distribution. And a podcast network like the Podglomerate, they have a couple of things. They have shows under their umbrella that they can put their own small marketing ads in to say, our network just launched a new show, to get it to existing listeners. They have relationships to different pod catchers that might want to feature the show's launch, which they did. They have relationships to advertisers, is the second reason, that are already advertising on their other shows. They could say, do you want to have an incremental, 50,000 impressions on this show to this audience? And they handle a lot of that. Like Jeff will come to me and say, this advertiser wants to sponsor the show. Are you interested? Yes, great. And he works with them on the terms. He says, here's what needs to be in the script, write a script, record it, let me get it approval, and then we'll start running it. There's an operational efficiency there and a real gain to the relationships that I was very keen to have. And also, as an independent podcaster, I work with an engineer, and that's great. And I have a couple of VAs, but sometimes the work is lonely. It's nice to have just somebody else that has a vested interest in what you're doing. So yeah, there's a lot of benefit to the network.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm on an email list of a sort of loose connection of mine that started a business with a partner, and they broke up recently, and the person has been emailing about how horrible it was and how they never should have brought on a partner. But I would have to say, I've been very, very interested in that, particularly recently. The power of teams, the power of groups, the power of having people working together. And I can just give a second to that. It's really, neither Chris or I could really be doing the Run With It podcast individually. We each bring so much that the other doesn't have. And now that we also have a producer on the podcast, that's not only a producer, but someone who cares about the topic and is interested. That third person is actually really nice because they help break the tie. When you keep going back and forth, oh, should we do this or should we do this? At least you have a third person to kind of say which direction to go. So yeah, I really hear what you're saying about the power of a team. Now,
Thanks.
Last week before
I saw Rob. I think Rob had something he wanted to say or add.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. There's a couple of things that, I've done a lot of interviews over the years and had a show that had a lot of guests. I had like 2 to 3 guests every episode that I had on my show. And one of the things that I've learned a lot about the podcasting medium over the years, and this kind of gets back, Jay, probably a little bit to your own experience here, but it's the issue of the power of the host versus the power of the guest to drive long-term listener growth to your podcast and consistency of audience. So as you do a podcast that emphasizes big celebrities, right? One of the things that's a risk, I believe, to a podcast is the possibility of being too much focused on the guest, right? And the listener comes in and listens to the guests, but then the host, which is actually the foundation of the show, kind of gets lost, right? Doesn't get the emphasis of it. So Jay, how did you address that issue, especially at the beginning when you brought on a big name guest? How important was your reputation before you started the show to be able to keep that listener coming back even after you didn't have that big guest on anymore? Did you have to always have that big guest,
Yeah.
have a big guest on to keep your audience?
I look at that as, in product management, there's this idea of come for the X, stay for the Y. And it's
Right.
like, there's apparent value that you could market that
Right.
gets people in the door. And then people
Mhm.
actually stick around for something else they discover along the way.
Right.
I'm the discoverable value. So I look at this as I see the marketing power of bringing in a name that already has an audience and a tribe.
Mhm.
But I do hope that they enjoy the show and enjoy me enough that they stick around. And if they
Right.
don't, that's on me. I don't think I actually need to try to overcompensate or anything like this. I think it's on me to be a good host. Like, I think about the role of being a podcast host. I really lean into the idea of host. I am hosting this person.
Right.
I want to host their idea and their perspective and make that easily transmitted and understood. And I want the guest to have a remarkable experience as a guest. Like, I want them to think, this was different than an interview I've done before. And they do a ton of interviews, so it's a high bar, but I very much want them to have a remarkable experience too. And
Okay.
usually that translates to the listener. And so far I've seen them stick around, but I will tell you, a step 2 of this show for me is I actually don't want to talk to big names forever. Like,
Right.
I would actually love to talk to people who
Because
are
you
much
need to
closer.
become the big name over time, right? To keep
Yes.
that audience, right?
I mean, I want them to trust me. I'm
Right.
building a relationship with them so they trust me to hit play on a name they don't recognize,
Mhm.
because I want to bring up lesser known names with
Right.
very important lessons that directly impact the listener, maybe someone that's closer to the listener's journey. But I know they won't hit play just yet because they need to trust me more. And so right now
Mhm.
I'm building that trust through getting them to click play on a person they recognize and saying, I like the way Jay asks questions. Jay's never served me wrong. Every time I've clicked play on an episode with Jay, I've appreciated it. So even when they don't know the name, I hope that continues to be true.
Right. Yep.
And was that where you were going to with what you were about to say? Just kind of when you talk about bringing on those other guests, is that the idea that you want to expose that, you don't want to expose people to somebody who's maybe a little lesser known, or what's your intention if you bring on somebody that people haven't heard as much from?
Well, I think the risk with my show's format right now, where I bring in, like, I talk to high profile creators who people have probably heard of, and they want a life like that. Like, I'm speaking to aspiring internet creators who are like, I want to make a living on YouTube. I want to make a living blogging. I want to make a living as a podcaster. And so I bring on names of people that they recognize. Those people are, in some cases, almost professional interview subjects at this point.
Mhm.
And they all talk about the work that made them break through. Like, when I talked to Vanessa Van Edwards, she built scienceofpeople.com. It's a lot about human psychology. And most of the time when she's interviewed on shows, they're asking her questions about human psychology. On my show, I talked to her about, how did you get to make a living writing on the internet and doing videos? But the more famous the person is, the longer they've been doing it, it starts to remove the relevancy to my listener, because they either got started when the landscape was different, maybe they had some sort of unfair advantage that broke them through, and they'll talk about that, and the listener can probably hear that and say, that's not really relevant right now. I want to get to what is relevant to you right now so I can best serve you to get the thing that you want. But the people who are closest to it aren't yet famous, right? So I actually want to get closer to where that person is, because I think I can help them better by talking to other people, but I need to earn their trust first before they'll even hit play on that episode.
Yeah, is that more of trying to play to the cutting edge of topics, right? Because people that typically play at the cutting edge tend to be a little bit probably newer, right? Would
Yes,
that be a comment?
totally.
Right.
Like, it's the old story of, if you can see the path laid out for you, like, it's no longer your path. Like, there's no longer a recipe there. And there's truth to that. So, like, in some ways I'm playing a losing battle no matter what I do, but I want to get closer, because some of the people I talk to, they got started writing when there was almost nobody else writing online, and they built a blog and they got SEO because there was just like almost no competition. So for someone starting out today, the landscape is super, super different. What do they need to know? That's the stories I want to tell, because I can ultimately help that person more.
Mhm.
Yeah, it also reminds me of an idea that I've always liked, that you should be kind of following someone who's one step ahead of you. You should also be mentoring someone who's one step behind you. And then you should also have kind of a community of people who are at your level kind of going along with you so you can compare notes. And I think that just from my experience, it's funny, I've wanted to teach about various things, right? And I can see 5-10 years ago, something I wanted to teach about, I don't want to teach about it anymore. And I don't even remember how it went. I don't even remember what it's like to not understand. Oh, you don't get that? It's so obvious to me now. So I think that's a really good point, that you need to bring in those people. They're so close to the questions of the day and the issues of the time that it's fresh in memory and they can speak to it very easily.
Or they're just so talented at what they're doing. Those are the people that I love to be around, is people that are just so naturally talented at whatever they're doing. It's inspiring. Yeah.
Great point. Switching the conversation a little bit, let's talk about, I just want to talk about things like the artwork, some of these other production things. And is it are you outsourcing this? It sounds like you have a network of friends, right? You had a friend make the music. How's the artwork getting made?
Yeah.
Are you spending a lot? Are you investing a lot? Is the Podglomerate spending money on this? Like, I'm just curious. And if this is secret stuff, you don't have to tell me, but just curious how that all comes together.
Yeah. Let me just start with the headline of, if you're going to be, whatever degree you're willing to invest in this, like, work with what you have, right? So for me, the initial artwork, the cover artwork, was made by an illustrator that I met through my accelerator business, my mastermind business. His name is Uriel. I saw his work. I'm like, this is phenomenal. I want that as my artwork. And I paid him for that. But we had built a relationship, so he probably gave me a better rate than I would have gotten just going to the market, right? I also paid the friend of mine who created the music, but again, probably got some sort of friends and family discount on that too. The ongoing artwork is honestly not something I'd recommend most shows do. I don't know how big of an impact it has. I love it, and I think it does a lot, but I'm also in the fortunate position that my sister likes to draw in her free time. And so my sister does the ongoing artwork on the episodes, and I'll pay her some money now and again as a thank you, but she does it because she wants to. I think that's difficult to sustain from a production and cost standpoint, unless your show is generating some good income. And I don't think it's an essential part of the show, but it's something that I think adds another level of polish. The guests appreciate it. I think it does make the guests more likely to share the episode because they appreciate it most of the time, unless it's the rare circumstance where they don't think it's flattering and they don't want to share it. But yeah, I mean, I worked with what I had. I have a sister who likes to draw those things, and I had some talented friends who were willing to help me do this in the beginning. If you don't have that, you can outsource it if you have the resources, or you can find some free tools,
Where are you even seeing that artwork? I'm curious. You're talking about episode level cover art?
Yeah. So it's when you listen to a show on any of your players, that's going to be the artwork that shows up instead of the show art. It's the custom episode artwork for that. It's on the episode pages that I make for each episode. I make 3 audiograms for each episode for the guest and for myself to share, and that uses the artwork too. So it shows up in a handful of places.
Yeah, I mean, not all listening platforms use the episode art.
It's true.
I mean, all of them use the series art, but just a handful of them use the actual episode art. Just keep that in mind. Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's the series art. And if you scroll down, Ethan, you'll start to see some of the episode specific art.
Yeah, that's great stuff.
Oh, you're muted, Ethan. You're still muted.
Sorry about that. I was saying that you talked about remarkable. You used the word remarkable. And a couple of weeks ago when Cortland Allen came on the show, he used the same word, remarkable. Make your podcast remarkable. And whether or not this is going to be an ongoing thing for you or not, I can see that the mindset of what you're doing, you know, whether it's making episode art or making an interesting production or any, you know, for Cortland, maybe it was research or putting the trends, you know, he really likes to incorporate trends and things, or, you know, he takes his programming skills and does something cool, right? It doesn't have to be the exact things that you did for your podcast, but what you're doing is you're just trying to think, what do I have at my disposal to make this remarkable? Whether you're doing that consciously, you know, with this in particular, but would you say that's kind of the underlying mindset when you incorporate something like this?
100%, because it ties back to what I was saying earlier. Podcasting is a ton of work. And if I'm going to put the work into it, I want people to listen to it. And discovery in podcasting is difficult. Most of it is word of mouth, which is why I specifically use the word remarkable. I'm not trying to necessarily speak to like some abstract level of quality. I'm saying, is this something that is going to make people pause and notice that it's better and remark on it to themselves and to others? That's what I'm going for.
Yeah, that's cool. And I think, you know, as I was first coming across you, and looking at this stuff, and that's why I'm asking the questions. I'm like, this guy, is he drawing the artwork? Is he editing the show? Is he, you know? And I think that that can be the way, that can be, for better or worse, the way that one comes across when they make some kind of thing that has multiple elements like that they appear kind of larger than life, that they're putting something together amazing. But I think that also speaks to the idea that of just building a team, you know, and it's really like, I'm assuming, you know, from your perspective, it's not about you or pretending that you're drawing everything, but it's about creating like a super you, like a super thing. Yeah. That's a symptom of all of these people's actions, right?
It's a team and it's a process. Each one of those, you're just sharing the page. Each one of those episode pages, I build a custom page in WordPress for each of them. And that could be exhausting, except my theme lets me save a template. And so now every week I just update some information in a template. I made that template from episode 1, you know, like having a process in place so that it's repeatable on a weekly basis, which I don't even think all podcasters need to release on a weekly basis. You could do bi-weekly, you could do monthly, you know, you don't have to put yourself on the same treadmill that I had. But I knew what treadmill I was on, and every part of the process I've tried to make more repeatable so that the bulk of the input of time is upfront, and then ongoing, it's just a process that makes sense to everybody and things happen.
I want to just call out right now, we've got about 15 minutes left in our time with you, and so people can start definitely from the host of the show. You can start chiming in when you want. Also, I want to hear from Marion, who joined us halfway through, just to hear kind of where you're at. I'm going to ask a question, but then just everybody keep in mind, you can start kind of mingling in here into the conversation, because I just have to ask this question. Like I said, once I get deep into something and start trying to make it amazing, sometimes it never happens, or a lot of times it never happens. And I just want to get something from your mind to mine. Like, how can you both, you know, get invested in something and try to make it cool and put some time, however much it is, into it, and still have it get out there? You know, have you ever experienced that issue, or is that just not something you deal with?
I have a couple things that I know about me. Is one, I have a crippling fear of public failure, and two, like an immense respect for deadlines. And so anytime that I'm making an expectation that I'm going to share something publicly, it's going to happen, because I don't want to fail publicly, and I respect deadlines. So what that means is, before I start anything, I make sure I'm absolutely committed to doing it for the long term, or at least I have a set duration of, this is a test I'm going to try for this period of time, and if it meets this threshold, I'll keep doing it. If it doesn't, I'll stop. I make that contract with myself ahead of time, because as you build subscribers, viewers, followers, whatever, your greatest asset with those people is trust. And I just will not put that at risk because I got excited about something and went a little bit too hard and put it out there before I'd even committed to myself that I was going to do it. So it really starts at like the commitment level to yourself. And once I've said, yep, it's something I'm going to do, I share it publicly for accountability, and then it'll happen.
Cool. I'm gonna like go back and listen to that a few times, just get it impressed in my head about how that works. I'd like to actually, if it's cool, Marion, I want to welcome you. You haven't been, or maybe you've been on a previous one, but we haven't met you. I'm not sure. I looked you up and you do the Spartan Up podcast. Is that correct? Cool. Do you mind unmuting yourself, just introducing yourself? And I don't know if you have a question. I'd love to hear if you have anything interesting to add to the conversation. Oh, you know what? I made it so you can't unmute yourself. Let me change that setting. I put ask to unmute now. You should be fine.
Yeah, I'm the behind the scenes producer of Spartan Up, which I've been doing for about 6 years, which is, my professional job. And then I started my own podcast called Grounded Content about a month ago. So two things that I was responding to, and I don't want to ask something that maybe you've already talked about, but first I was just going to say, I love the sort of creative element to just what you've talked about, that there's this value to your circle of friends. It sounds like sometimes you do things just because it seems like a cool creative idea, not because, of a marketing analysis. And I think sometimes that works better because it's more authentic. But I was interested in what you were just talking about, commitment. And, as somebody who works pretty much full time for somebody else, we built this, I built it from 0 to over 25 million where it is now over all these years. But starting my own thing, was there a point at which you made a leap? Because it sounds like when you started this podcast, you were all in. And I've sort of started my own, but I've sort of dipped a toe in the water because I'm still doing my other thing. Did you kind of make a conscious leap, or did you kind of do it while you were doing other things?
I started considering making this podcast in June of 2019. And I started doing interviews in September of 2019. I decided to approach the podcast network in like October of 2019. And I released the first episode in March of 2020 this year. So all along the way, I was giving myself little checkpoints of, am I going to do this? Because once I shared publicly that I was going to do it, I knew I was all in. Because I think it's hard to expect that someone else is going to be all in with you if you're not. And I wanted to give this the best shot that I could from the beginning. I want to like accelerate failures in the stuff that I commit to doing. So if I'm going to commit to trying it and I'm going all in, I want to put everything I can into it so that if it fails, I can say, I ran the experiment and I gave my best and it failed and I'll kill it. But I think it's kind of this like middling level of commitment without any clear metrics of like, at what point is this something I continue to do or do I kill it? That eats up a ton of our time and attention and ultimately doesn't yield anything.
That's such a great answer. There was I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that there was a great line that I heard that made me think of, which was I heard a boxing coach, but he said most people are afraid to find out their best isn't good enough.
Yeah. No, and the thing is, so many times we get so enamored with an idea that we think is a great idea and we think it'd be successful that actually we're afraid to pursue it to exactly your point, to find out that we actually can't make it or it's not a great idea. And so we hold on to it for forever and it like eats at us and ends up serving nobody.
So I will, I'm just going to put a link in the chat. This is actually written by the sister of a friend of mine. It's called Be Bad First. And it's actually a book about this whole conundrum of you can't get better at something until you go ahead and start doing it, but we don't, as a society, we don't like to look bad. We don't like things to be awkward. And so we just don't start new things and they never happen. And somehow along the way, you've been able to make it not look that bad. It looks good at this point. So I'm not sure where it looked bad. Maybe it was before you started releasing, things like that. I'm sure there was that time. Would you say that moment of committing to the podcast network was the point of no return? Like, were there moments before where you could have said, hey, I've got a couple things?
I think yes. Yeah, because then there was an external accountability source. I mean, our structure is a partnership, and both of us have a way out of that partnership if we like. But at the point that somebody else was taking it seriously, like, you better believe I'm taking it seriously. If the Podglomerate had said, we don't think there's a show here, I don't think we're going to pursue it, I might have questioned doing it. Because again, like, I was really focused on distribution, and I wanted this to be something that actually generated income for me as part of my overall, business portfolio of income. Like, I wanted to do this as a business, and I wanted to support my other lines of businesses too, sure. But this is not just a marketing effort for the other business. Like, I wanted this to generate revenue on its own. And if I went through all of 2020 and it didn't generate revenue, I'd probably be questioning right now whether or not I wanted to consider, or I wanted to continue doing it next year. But it's done pretty well this year, and it's kind of a no-brainer at this point. But yeah, I had that moment.
Anybody else? I don't want to keep being the one that asks all the questions. Does anybody else have something they want to contribute? I have more I want to ask.
I'm curious as to Test City USA, what that was all about.
Okay, so
I mean, in a minute, right? Obviously, I can watch the trailer.
Yeah,
but I was curious what took you in that direction.
Test City USA is a full-length documentary that my team and I produced last summer. And by my team and I mean my other podcast co-host, Eric. That show talks to startup founders outside of the Valley. And we just kept returning this thought of, this is fun, but every time we talk to founder in Kansas City, they give us a perspective on the ecosystem, but it's one data point. And we'll talk to more people in that city over time, and we'll get more data points. But we got interested in trying to create a tapestry of a single startup community using multiple voices, but it'd be a really difficult thing to make as a piece of audio. So we tabled it. And then last summer, or summer of 2019, we had the opportunity to work with an intern from The Ohio State University who was interested in becoming a filmmaker. And that internship was paid for by the university because he was a student athlete, and the program was to get student athletes career experience. And he came in with equipment. He came in with a lot of time and no cost to us. And so we just scheduled a bunch of interviews. I had the audio equipment. We filmed it. We thought that this would be like a 30-minute prototype that we would share and try to maybe get a future film funded of like a full version, but he just knocked it out of the park. And we had so much content that we thought, what if we just put this together? And we focused it on Columbus, Ohio, which is where I live, because I have the relationships here. I could get, we interviewed more than 24 people in the span of about a month. And it was just me sending an email saying, can I talk to you for 30 minutes? I'm not sure what we're going to do with this. It just came out so well. And we had this like very finite window because he was going back to college in the fall. And so we thought, let's just try to make a full swipe of this, and we'll share it at a local theater as a screening, as like kind of a capstone to his summer. And we went to a local theater, and he said, yeah, we'll let you show the film here. We do that for local filmmakers. It's like this amazing independent theater that still exists in Columbus, Ohio. And he said, but do you have any interest in doing film festivals? And we said, I don't know. We hadn't thought about it. He said, the thing is, if you want to pursue film festivals, they will not consider entries that have already been theatrically aired, typically. So if you want to do film festivals, you need to pursue that first. Lucky for you, we have a film festival here in Columbus next month. If you get me a 45-minute cut, I'll put it in front of the judges. And so that gave us like a week to create the first edit of 45 minutes. They accepted it, and that gave us 2.5 weeks to finish editing the film to air it at the film festival theatrically. And so we worked like crazy, and we did it, and we aired it, and it was amazing. And I'll probably never make a film again because it was crazy.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
I want to go back to, again, I'm interrupting. Please, anybody else interrupt if you want to interrupt me, your game. The income side of it. So you said you wanted to start some people just start a podcast. They want to start a podcast. Has it boosted your income for your independent business, for your courses? Has it been something that you're seeing something significant, or, any talk about that, how it's boosting things?
The biggest income is directly through sponsorship and through programmatic ads through our host Megaphone. I'm sure it's had some trickle down effect to some of my courses. I know I've had a couple of people purchase courses because of it. I've actually been an affiliate of creators on the show. And so when I say this is Ryan Robinson and he has an incredible course on blogging that I've purchased, if you want to purchase it, the link is in the show notes. That's an affiliate link. So there's some benefits like that, but it's almost all derived directly from sponsorship.
Got it. But so that's still a goal of yours, though, as you build it, that you can use it as a sort of like a lead magnet to your independent work.
Yeah, I think of it as just like overall audience building for me and the work that I do. Like I will continue to create products. Just this week, I had so many people ask me about my podcasting process this week that I said, you know what, maybe there's interest for a course around this. And Wednesday morning, I woke up and I spun up a landing page called Podcast Like the Pros. And I sent an email to my list and I said, I get a lot of people asking me about my process. If you're interested, like purchase this on pre-sale before November 1st. If 10 of you do this, I'll make it. And 13 people have bought that so far. So now I got to make that course. But like, that's the benefit of having some amount of audience is like, I want them to grow to trust me and like my perspective on things and know that ultimately I'm going to help you be a more successful creative or creator online. And I'll make products for that down the road. I'll write things that recommend certain software like ConvertKit, which I'm an affiliate for. All that kind of swirls together. But I actually think I'll be doing less and less client work. Maybe I'll do some sort of like live course cohorting, but I don't think I'm going to be doing much client work in the near future because of income from sponsorship, courses, affiliate revenue, that type of thing.
Cool. Very interesting. Somebody else have something to add? No, I just don't want to cut anybody off. Marion, any final words from you as a sort of person that joined us today that we haven't met before?
Well, if you didn't already cover it, I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about the sort of the mechanics of your podcast network. But if you've already spoken about that, I don't want to have you repeat it.
We touched on it briefly.
We have just a couple of minutes. If you have to run to like in 1 minute, then you don't have to get started on that.
We touched on it briefly. The biggest things to know are they keep a cut of all advertising revenue because that's, what they're out there actively doing. And that's the biggest benefit. They have shows in their portfolio. Like I've interviewed other hosts on their shows. They've put some ads for Creative Elements in the feeds of their other shows, which has helped with audience building. They also have relationships with podcatchers and other creators. So they're very much out there being an evangelist for us on the marketing front and sponsorship front. And I handle all of production. Sometimes they'll even source some guests for us if I ask, but most of the time I'm out there sourcing guests on my own. Mostly marketing and advertising.
So are you doing any pre-recording of live reads for the dynamic program that they have?
Yeah. I mean, I record the ads in my voice.
Oh, you do? Okay.
We have a sponsor right now. We have Podia and Hostinger, and we basically ask them, what are some of the main points that we want here? And then I'll write the scripts as I would write it, speaking to my audience. And then, I'll record those things.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then those get dropped into certain locations in your show transition. Are they early in the show, or are they midpoint, or are they later, or what's the insertion cadence?
We have 8 marked spots per episode. Not all of them get filled, but 4 locations, 2 spots in each location. We have a pre-roll, a post-roll, and we have 2 mid-roll areas. And most of the sponsors, we sell a mix of pre-roll and first mid-roll. And we'll reserve one of the pre-rolls for something I'm pushing for, like reviews on Apple Podcasts, or there's a new referral program we're trying out. And we'll reserve the second mid-roll for us a lot of times if that inventory is still there.
And what's the usual duration of the reads that you're doing? Are they 30, 60?
Pre-roll is generally 30.
30?
The mid-rolls are 60. And show episodes are somewhere between 45 and 60 minutes. I try to keep all the mid-rolls within the first 30 minutes. So I'll have the first mid-roll about 15 minutes in, the second mid-roll about 30 minutes in. And then after that, like I'll still have some narration from time to time cutting in, but we won't have ads after that point.
Yeah, it sounds like you're following best standard practices, definitely with that.
which was
Yeah.
all taught to me by
Yeah.
Jeff, the network. I had no
Right.
idea any of that.
Right.
Like he did all that. He told me exactly what advertisers would want. He tells me how long things
Right.
need to be, where they're going to be. I get it produced, and I say, here's the asset, upload
Right.
it where you see fit.
Right.
And we use Megaphone, and it tracks all of the
All the downloads and
impressions and everything.
Right. Right. Awesome. That's great.
One thing I noticed listening to your episodes was there were more ads than I necessarily expected, but I also was thinking about it in terms of your podcast network, right? And thinking, yeah, they probably know that, like Jay doesn't have to sit here being like, should I put in more ads or shouldn't I? Or, is this they
Yeah.
probably know, hey, we can put these ads here. This is pretty standard. It's going to work.
And the great thing about Megaphone, if we have unused inventory, Megaphone will place ads on our behalf. So we've had like Starbucks and Progressive and even McDonald's in there at times. Like Megaphone sells sponsorship to advertisers, and they'll place it in shows that fit certain, I don't even know what the criteria are, but I'll be listening to one of my episodes and it's like, Mindy Kaling's new show is being advertised in Creative Elements. Very cool. And then we get a cut of that revenue.
That's great.
All right, I'll make sure we wrap up on time here. Jay, thank you so much for joining. This has been a really fascinating conversation. Really appreciate you being open and sharing. Looking forward to getting to know you better over time, and just make sure if you have anything that you want to share with anybody that we missed, is there any place you want to send them? Make sure they have their URL or anything specific you want to share.
I don't think so. I'd love for you to check out the show. If the course I just talked about is interesting to you, you can go to learn.jklaus.com and find it there. It doesn't have an easy URL yet because I haven't made it, but it's in production. It'll be done by December.
Sounds like you can probably get a good deal on it too.
Half off for now.
Awesome. Okay. Well,
Right.
we'll send out emails to people who joined us today. Marion, I'll make sure you're updated. We'll do a review session on this next week with just the host of the show, where we talk about what we learned. And I'll also send out some potential action steps. We like to come up with some action steps from the episode, from our learnings from Jay that people can take and actually apply. So without further ado, though, I'll say thank you to Jay. You're welcome to sign off. Rob and Vinay, if you want to stay on the call, I'll just sign us off a YouTube and Facebook. But thank you everyone for joining, and we'll see you again soon.
All right.
All right,
Thanks for
thank
having
you.
Thank you.
Bye. See you.
Later.
Thanks, Jay.
Yeah. Great to meet you, Rob. Great to meet you,
too,
Vinay.
right?
Ethan, great to meet you face to face as well.
Yeah, you too. I hope